Welcome to JLARC, where we are serious about good government. And I want to introduce you to Hal Greer. He's our executive director. If you've never met him, he's got a few opening introductory remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the Commission. I'm Hal Greer, the Staff Director of JLARC. This morning, we're going to present the findings from two reviews that we've conducted this year. First, we'll present our review of community colleges. The Chancellor of the Community College System is here this morning and will speak after the JLARC presentation. The second presentation will be of the findings from the review of the state's capital maintenance and construction program. Before we begin our first presentation, I would like to mention that you have one item in your materials that we're not going to discuss this morning. That's a list of recommendations of all JLARC recommendations directed to the General Assembly over the last 4 years that have not been implemented. If any of you are interested in pursuing any of these recommendations through legislation, we're happy to work with you in developing it. With that, Mr. Chairman, the first item is our review of Virginia community colleges and the changing higher education landscape. As I know you're all aware, the landscape is changing in fairly dramatic ways. You'll hear this morning that as the landscape has changed, the community college system has made and continues to make significant changes to adapt. I want to thank Chancellor DeRay and his staff, as well as the individual college presidents and their staffs for their assistance. They have all been extremely helpful in this review. Justin Brown oversaw the study, and Stephanie Papps was the project leader. Stephanie?
Good morning, Ms. Papps.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. As Hal said, my name is Stephanie Papps, and I was the project leader for our review of the community colleges and how they're adapting to the changing higher education landscape. I'd like to thank Kate Agnelli, Mitch Perry, and Ellen Miller for their assistance on this study. Slide 2 describes the study mandate that directed our work. In November of last year, you directed us to conduct a study of how the Virginia community college system is adapting to the changing higher education landscape. We conducted a similar study last year that reviewed how four-year higher education institutions were adapting. For this study, you asked us to look at virtual instruction, workforce and career and technical education programs, dual enrollment, how community colleges are adjusting to the changing landscape, and potential efficiencies. Slide 3 summarizes our research activities for this study, which included collecting and analyzing a variety of data sets, conducting site visits to a sample of community colleges around the state, and interviewing VCCS staff, community college staff, local school division staff, and others. Our study found that academic transfer enrollment is declining, while dual enrollment and career and technical education enrollment is increasing. The proportion of students taking courses online has increased substantially, and students taking asynchronous online courses tend to be somewhat less successful. We found that enrollment in CTE programs is growing, and the state's shorter-term credential program, Fast Forward, is well designed, but success in meeting wage goals is mixed. Additionally, we found that about 1/3 of recent high school graduates participated in dual enrollment courses, but very few obtained a credential. And finally, we found that the changing landscape warrants at least considering a more regionalized approach to improve efficiency. I'll start by providing you with a little bit of background on VCCS and the community colleges. The General Assembly created VCCS in 1966 to provide more accessible and affordable higher education to Virginians. VCCS operates 23 individual community colleges with 40 campuses across the state. The State Board for Community Colleges is the system's governing board, which sets tuition and fees and statewide policies and appoints a chancellor. The chancellor serves as the chief executive officer of the community college system. Each individual college also has a president appointed by the chancellor. VCCS has a system office that coordinates administration of board policies and provides support to the colleges. In fiscal year 26, VCCS was appropriated $1.4 billion, half of which was state general funds. VCCS generally offers two major types of programs. The first type of program is academic transfer. These are college-level credit and degrees that can be applied to a bachelor's degree program at a four-year institution. The second type of program is career and technical education. These programs are designed to train workers for success in the workforce. These CTE programs can be credit programs where a student takes a series of classes leading to an applied associate's degree or certificate. Or these CTE programs can be non-credit programs, usually fast-forward programs, where a student takes a short-term course lasting anywhere from 6 weeks to 6 months, and they learn a specific set of occupational skills that prepare them to earn an industry-recognized credential. Over the past decade, VCCS has been losing enrollment in its traditional credit student groups, which are the academic transfer, CTE credit, and non-program place students. VCCS enrollment for these traditional student groups declined by 27% over the past 10 years. Over half of that decline was attributable to academic transfer enrollment, which decreased by over 30,000 students. Growth in dual enrollment and fast-forward programs have mitigated much of that enrollment decline, though. This slide starts by showing those traditional VCCS student groups we just talked about. Dual enrollment students grew by 55% over the past decade. Fast Forward began enrolling students in 2016-17 and has grown to just over 20,000 students in 2024-25. Across all these different student types, VCCS total enrollment has declined by just 7% over the decade. Even though enrollment has declined over the past decade, in the past 2 years, the community colleges have experienced enrollment increases. As you all are aware, the landscape for higher education has been changing over the past several years, and this is starting to impact the community colleges. VCCS colleges experienced several years of enrollment declines, but in the past 2 to 3 years, nearly all of the colleges have seen enrollment increases. However, these increases have largely been a result of increases in dual enrollment and fast forward. Over the past few years, students have been increasingly demanding online courses. Students and their families also have a growing interest in career and technical programs that directly lead to jobs. Finally, community colleges here in Virginia and nationwide are seeing increasing numbers of dual enrollment students as students have been seeking ways to reduce the cost of a college degree. Each section of the report and this briefing examines how these changes are impacting the community colleges. Mr. Chairman, I'll pause here for questions.
Any members have a question? How much of the enrollment decline is just due to the plateau in 18-year-olds?
Just for 18?
Demographically, because I've heard the last few years that we don't have as many 18-year-olds or high school graduates just in the population.
Yeah, I would have to look at the exact numbers, but the first-time in college students are declining somewhat. But some of the 18-year-olds that are enrolled in the community colleges are those dual enrollment students, so it's a little difficult to parse those two out because the dual enrollment students are increasing.
Let's just say not 18-year-olds. Let's say people who are of age that need a higher education. Is that plateaued?
Right. So the first time in college freshmen, those college-age students, that population of students is declining some.
Okay. So that explains some of the decline.
That's right. Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Anybody else here? Okay. Yeah. Senator McDougall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And that decline is going to continue, and it's going to get significantly worse after 30, correct?
Senator McDougall, yes, we expect the decline to continue as the demographics begin to change and we see fewer high school graduates.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Senator McDougall.
I've heard some describe it as a cliff after 30, so not just a decline, but a substantial decrease.
Senator McDougall, yes, that's correct. I've heard it described as cliff as well. I think that the community colleges to some extent are trying to, which we'll start to talk about, are trying to begin to transition more towards those career and technical education programs where they would be recruiting more working age adults.
Thank you, Mr.
Sure, certainly. Anybody else? Yep. Delegate Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, you looked at other states. I don't want to get ahead of your presentation. If you deal with that later, I'd be glad to wait on this. But my question is, are there other states who have been able to forestall the decline by some efforts that they've made or some plan that they've put in place?
Delegate Ware, that's an excellent question. I would need to follow up on that. I'm not quite sure if any states have actually been able to forestall the decline in enrollment.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
But, Mr. Chairman, if I might, just to, I think...
Mr. Brown.
Delegate Ware, to your question, I think forestalling the demographic part is difficult to do, as you know. But as Stephanie said, I do think there is this shift going on where they are trying to kind of either, I think there's two things going on. Regionalize and kind of get the footprint a little smaller maybe and get some efficiencies, but also focus more on that mid-career student who may want to come back and kind of upskill and get a particular credential. So I think those things move in opposite directions, obviously, but in terms of affecting demographics, that's very difficult to do. But I think we have some examples later of some other states that are focusing on efficiencies to shift towards that.
So later in this presentation, you're going to have examples of states that are doing innovative things that we're not doing?
Some people might say that efficiencies aren't the most innovative things, Mr. Chairman, but I think there's clearly states that are trying to adapt to this by getting some better economies of scale. I think there are also some things going on in the workforce area that we maybe have in the report that we could talk about too.
Thank you. Yeah. Please continue if there's no other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This next section will review online learning. VCCS colleges have been offering online learning for at least the last 20 years, but its use has surged in recent years. When the pandemic began in March of 2020, all classes transitioned to online for a period of time. Online learning use has declined some since the height of the pandemic, but use has never returned to pre-pandemic levels. This next slide describes the types of online learning that VCCS colleges currently offer. Asynchronous learning, where a student completes coursework on their own schedule, is the most common type of online learning across VCCS colleges. Use of synchronous, hybrid, and high-flex formats has been increasing in the past few years as online learning adoption broadens and matures. We found that a substantial portion of Virginia community college education now occurs online. VCCS colleges taught fewer courses in 2024-25 compared to 10 years ago because of enrollment declines. Most of the eliminated course sections were in person, and the number of online and hybrid course sections remained relatively stable while becoming a larger proportion of courses overall. In 2015-16, 24% of courses were taught entirely online, and 7% were taught in a hybrid format. By 2024-25, 50% were taught entirely online, and an additional 9% were taught in a hybrid format. The shift toward online learning is also apparent from the growth in the proportion of students taking online courses. Over the past decade, a growing proportion of VCCS students have been taking all of their courses online, increasing from 17% in 2015-16 to 41% in 2024-25. At the same time, the proportion of students taking all of their courses in person has declined from 39% to 11%. We found that students tend to be less successful in asynchronous courses than in-person courses, but the differences weren't substantial. Several different analyses indicate students are less successful when they take an asynchronous course. On average, when we look at all courses, success rates were 3 percentage points lower in asynchronous courses than in-person courses. The success gap was closing over time, with the gap larger in years prior to 2024-25. However, despite the somewhat small difference across all VCCS courses, the difference in success rates was larger in some courses. We examined the outcomes for students taking 10 specific gateway courses using a more rigorous statistical analysis. We focused on these gateway courses because they're some of the most commonly taken courses at VCCS. Many of these courses are required for many different degree pathways. And academic research shows that when students aren't successful in certain gateway courses in their first year of college enrollment, they're less likely to complete their degree at all. We found that success rates in some of these courses were quite a bit lower for students taking these courses asynchronously compared to their peers taking the same course in person. Our statistical analysis found that this difference was statistically significant in these 10 gateway courses.
Let me ask you a question. Isn't this a good advertisement for teachers? Like if you have a teacher in your class, you can ask questions, it's interactive. Doesn't this bolster the need for teachers or the preference to have a teacher in the class?
Mr. Chairman, I think that there are likely a lot of reasons why there's a difference in performance, but that live instruction with a teacher and the ability to interact with not only the teachers, but peers is likely one of those explanations.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
This, Delegate Rasul.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A quick question. Can we elaborate on what success means? Is it simply passing the class or some other measure?
Delegate Rasul, that's a good question. So when we looked at success, we were looking at success. We define success as an A, B, or C in a course, or a pass in a pass-fail course. And then we just defined not being successful in a course as a D, F, or a withdrawal. And the reason we included Ds in the not successful rate is because often the Ds will not transfer to a four-year institution.
Further question, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Rasul.
So we had a technical school in Roanoke that was a for-profit entity that was doing, had a variety of medical programs that they had, for example. And students would pass and graduate, and they were viewed to be largely, many of them, non-competent in their healthcare field. And I know this is individual course by course, and I don't know if later on you might get to some of that, but just wondering if you have any general reflection on, beyond passing a course, the general competency in their eventual or prospective field.
Delegate Rasul, I think that when we were looking at sort of general competency, we looked at that to some extent with the fast forward programs, where those students are not only completing their coursework, but then going on to get a credential. And we'll talk a little bit about that credentialing rate for that program specifically when we get to that section.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Delegate Rasul. Anybody else? Okay, please continue.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We also reviewed how students who had to retake a course fared in asynchronous versus in-person courses, and found that students tended to fare slightly worse when they retook courses asynchronously. In the case of retakes, 42% of asynchronous students were unsuccessful compared to 36% of their in-person peers, so about a 6 percentage point gap. VCCS and the colleges should take what actions are available to minimize gaps in success rates between asynchronous and in-person students. And there are a few key practices that could help to facilitate student success in asynchronous courses. However, we found a few areas where colleges could more consistently use some of these practices. Additionally, the system office could take a stronger role in monitoring success rates in asynchronous courses. This slide summarizes the recommendations in this area. We recommend that students who are retaking a course asynchronously be required to meet with an advisor within the add-drop period for that course. The report also recommended that VCCS periodically monitor student success in asynchronous courses compared to in-person courses, and use that information to target assistance. Next, we found that VCCS has increased the use of asynchronous online courses and plans to continue doing so, but hasn't determined the appropriate mix of class formats. VCCS has increased its use of online asynchronous instruction over the past decade, with 41% of courses being delivered asynchronously. 10 colleges teach at least half of their classes asynchronously, while all colleges teach at least 1/4 of their classes asynchronously. And according to the VCCS strategic plan, they intend to continue expanding the use of asynchronous courses. A tension exists between the expansion of access that asynchronous courses can provide and the extent to which these course types can compromise student success. Historically, guidance hasn't been provided to the colleges on how to consider these factors, and ultimately how to determine the proper balance between asynchronous and other course formats. The report recommends that the State Board of Community Colleges periodically evaluate the use of asynchronous learning and establish policies to guide the use of asynchronous courses. Mr. Chairman, I'll pause here for questions.
Okay, do we have any questions, commissioners? Okay. It doesn't look like we do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this next section will summarize our work reviewing career and technical education programs at the community colleges. Overall, enrollment in all CTE programs has increased by 8% over the past decade. That includes enrollment in credit programs and non-credit fast-forward programs. However, most of the growth in CTE has been concentrated in the fast-forward programs. Those programs began enrolling students in 2016-17, and in the most recent year enrolled over 20,000 students. Fast Forward now accounts for 27% of CTE enrollment. We found that VCCS's CTE programs are generally well aligned with high demand jobs. This slide shows enrollment and alignment for the 10 largest CTE credit programs. As you can see, 7 out of the 10 programs directly align with occupations on the high demand list. For the 3 programs that don't directly align, upon further analysis, we found that these programs are broader-based programs that equip students with skills that they could use in several jobs on the high demand list. Slide 30 shows a similar analysis for the 10 highest enrollment Fast Forward programs. 9 out of the 10 programs directly aligned with a high demand occupation. The 10th program didn't directly align, but similar to the credit CTE programs, this program equips students with skills that can be used in jobs on the high demand list. We also found that Fast Forward programs tend to have positive outcomes, at least in the short term. Nearly all Fast Forward program enrollees complete their program. Then, about 72% of Fast Forward program participants report earning the industry-recognized credential. Credential rates can vary substantially by program. For example, credential rates are relatively high for CDL and construction trades. However, credential rates are lower for healthcare, business, and IT-related programs. Credential rates can also vary somewhat by college. Increasing the credential rate is one of VCCS's strategic plan goals. To accomplish this, VCCS staff are planning to pilot certain strategies colleges with particularly high credential rates have used. Some of these strategies involved including test prep in the class and scheduling courses to end around the same time as the credential exam. Fast Forward graduates do typically experience wage gains. 12 months after Fast Forward completion and earning the associated credential, the median Fast Forward participant had an initial annual wage gain of about $10,800. Evidence on the extent to which Fast Forward completers earn a living wage is mixed, though. The median wages for Fast Forward participants a year after receiving their credential was approximately $41,000, which meets the state's living wage for a one-person household. However, this falls below the living wage for a household with 1 adult and 1 child. This is consequential because a VCCS survey indicated that 58% of Fast Forward students had 1 or more dependent. The Fast Forward program trains workers for entry-level jobs, though, and many of the fields that Fast Forward participants enter have the potential for substantial wage growth. However, VCCS currently only conducts wage growth analysis to 18 months post-completion, which makes it impossible to know whether participants are experiencing additional wage growth. Finally, we found that demand for Fast Forward spots outpaces funding, and the program could benefit from more comprehensive program information. Enrollment in Fast Forward programs has more than doubled since fiscal year 18. But despite this rapid growth, workforce shortages still exist. There are still many more job openings than the number of Fast Forward students. Additionally, some Fast Forward programs with low program availability have a substantial number of job openings, areas like cloud computing, plumbing, and masonry. It would seem prudent to focus any future expansions of the Fast Forward program on these areas where there's a large gap between program enrollments and job openings. Demand for Fast Forward spots is expected to exceed available revenue in fiscal year 26, and as a result, enrollment in the program will likely plateau this year. While the Fast Forward program appears to be generally effective and there's demand for the program, gaps still exist in what's known about the program's outcomes. Key questions that need to be answered include, do program participants work in the fields for which they were trained? Do program participant incomes grow over a longer-term horizon, like 3 to 5 years? Do program participants stack their credentials, and does that stacking lead to further increased wages? And what strategies can be adopted across the colleges to increase credentialing rates? The report recommends that VCCS collect additional information to answer these questions. Mr. Chairman, I'll pause here for questions.
Okay. Members of the commission, yep. Delegate Wilt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On your slide 31, the finding fast forward programs tend to have a positive outcomes, at least in the short term. What do you mean by that?
Thank you, Delegate. Well, when we say that it has positive outcomes, we're really talking about the wage gains that the median participant is experiencing. So they're experiencing on the median, participants in the program experience wage gains of about $10,000 to their annual wages. So that would be sort of the positive outcomes that we're referring to there. But then when we talk about the outcomes being a little mixed, we're talking more about the living wage there, where for more than a one-person household, the median wages aren't quite meeting the living wage there.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator McDougall.
I met with a couple community college presidents recently, and they love the dual enrollment and they love the fast forward programs, but they say they're getting killed financially with those programs because we don't give them additional money for putting them together. Did y'all look at that at all? What the financial impact on the community college system is with those two programs?
Senator McDougall, we do look a little bit at the overall revenues for the community colleges when we get a little further into this. And one of the things that we do see is that just in terms of the programs that have been to date sort of subsidizing the more expensive programs at the community colleges, the enrollment there is declining. So there's starting to be a little bit of an imbalance between the revenues coming in and what the programs cost.
Senator McDougall.
Mr. Chairman, the presidents I met with had come up with some pretty, I think, creative ways to fundraise, to get infrastructure or to co-locate programs. They were saying the per student cost and the instructor cost is where they were getting hit. I think more so from dual enrollment than fast forward, but they were feeling the financial pinch of those two programs. Because we don't charge for dual enrollment, correct?
Senator McDougall, that's for certain programs, the community colleges are not charging for dual enrollment.
We're going to have a chancellor before us in a little bit. And does staff think that that the VCCS has the capability to do a longer analysis of outcomes beyond 18 months without, or is that going to cost us a lot of money to do a more longitudinal?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, that's a good question. When we looked at that, we felt like there were several tools that VCCS has in their toolbox right now in terms of either information they already have or information they could add on to tools they're already using, like surveys or collecting Virginia Employment Commission administrative data over a longer term, where they could do this probably within many of the resources they already have.
With the existing resources
Yes.
Your okay, assessment. Okay, anybody? Yeah, Delegate Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to just follow up on this. When I look at the occupations listed on slide 30 from the fast forward programs, I would just say anecdotally, I hear from more parents and community folks and people in the trades that this is where we need more people, we need more help in producing folks who are prepared. So I will be interested, both as you go further on, but also as when the VCCS leadership presents to us, what if Senator McDougall's concerns are at the forefront of their thinking, or if there's things that we need to do to enhance the ability of folks to get into these programs. There's not really a question there, I don't guess.
Thank you, Delegate. Well,
So there.
Sorry.
So let me ask you about the one that sticks out here a little bit, the highway and road construction trades. Is that heavy? That includes heavy equipment operators?
Mr. Chairman, that's for the most part, heavy equipment, and that's specifically out of one community college. That's at Germanna Community College. And I believe that's the program that trains folks to work in VDOT professions.
Okay, and you don't have any, do you have any explanation on why that one did not live up to the big blue dot like the rest of them have?
So, Mr. Chairman, I think that was just a mismatch of the specific code that's on the program versus the code that's on different professions, because when we looked at the types of professions that are on the list, there are professions that are on the list that this program would train folks to work in. So it's just a little bit of a mismatch.
Well, I think all of us hear about the lack of of workforce in the construction industry, and we only have one community college that's training people in heavy equipment operations, which is really key. Maybe the chancellor can tell us later whether he thinks we should expand that program, or what do you think?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Do you think we should do it? Do you think we should go beyond Germanna Community College and do it at other places?
I think that would be a question the chancellor could better answer than.
All right, Justin Brown here has a comment.
Mr. Chairman, if I might,
you look eager.
Just to circle back on something Senator McDougall brought up, I think it's an important point. So a lot of times folks will talk about dual enrollment and these kind of fast-forward CTE programs in the same breath. But in terms of the way they're funded and operate, they're fundamentally different. So the dual enrollment programs, really based on our analysis, don't impose much of a financial burden on the colleges, and we'll talk about that in the next section. But to the senator's point, in the report, we have examples of some of the big differences in the cost per credit hour to provide some of these technical courses as opposed to some of the, as Stephanie was talking about, the traditional college courses. So there is a big funding, I guess, imbalance on the CTE or the fast forward programs, but we're not really seeing that on the dual enrollment programs, just to clarify.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Chair,
Yeah, Senator Deeds, welcome.
I'm looking at slide 29 and wondering the same thing about mental and social health services. Do you just not, that's not taken on in the community colleges, training those people, because that's an area of huge need throughout the state?
Senator Deeds, that's a good question. So the program that's on here, that program is offered by a few community colleges. It is more than one on that program. But I think the issue there is that program, it's a broad-based program, so they lump a lot of different programs in it. So you could be under that sort of code training folks to be substance abuse counselors and that type of thing that are in very high demand. And so it's another issue of it just doesn't quite line up neatly on the codes. But when we look at it further, that's training folks to do a lot of professions that are in really high need throughout the state.
Senator Deeds, you follow up?
I was just curious about that.
Okay. Anybody else? I don't see anybody's light on. Okay, so please continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This next section provides a status update on dual enrollment, specifically in the context of the recently enacted College and Career Ready Virginia legislation. Slide 39 shows dual enrollment as a proportion of VCCS's total enrollment. The number of dual enrollment students grew by 55% over the past decade, and today dual enrollment students make up 1/4 of VCCS students. The General Assembly established dual enrollment as an option for high school students that's intended to help them save time and money on a college degree. As a result, for most dual enrollment students, the two most relevant VCCS programs are the Uniform Certificate of General Studies, or UCGS, and Passport programs. UCGS and Passport were established to provide community college students with curricula that was guaranteed to transfer to the state's four-year institutions and satisfy general education requirements. UCGS is a 10-class curriculum and Passport is a 5-class curriculum. Despite the policy goals for dual enrollment, when chefs surveyed dual enrollment students about why they participated, they offered varied responses. Some students indicated that they did hope to save time and money on a degree through dual enrollment, but others indicated that they took dual enrollment courses to explore college coursework and to boost their GPAs for their college application. We found that 2/3 of recent high school graduates did not take any dual enrollment courses, and few of the remaining 1/3 who did take dual enrollment courses completed any VCCS credential or program. Approximately 43% of dual enrollment graduates in 2024 took just 1 or 2 dual enrollment courses. Only 12% of dual enrollment graduates took 10 or more dual enrollment courses, which is the number of courses needed to earn UCGS. Put in the larger context of all high school graduates in Virginia, somewhere between 3 and 4% of all high school graduates took 10 or more dual enrollment courses. A small proportion of dual enrollment students are currently completing any credentials, including UCGS, Passport, or another VCCS degree. Approximately 9% of high school graduates took any dual enrollment courses, actually actually earned any VCCS credential. In the larger context of all high school graduates, between 2 and 3% of all high school graduates in the state earned any VCCS credential through dual enrollment. For UCGS, 4% of all high school graduates took any dual enrollment courses, actually completed that program. That means between 1 and 1.3% of all high school graduates in 2024 actually completed UCGS through dual enrollment. Proportions are even smaller for students that just completed the Passport program. We found that it's unclear how much demand for dual enrollment might increase in the future, but additional effort and planning could help to ensure that the College and Career Ready Virginia program is implemented effectively. As you all know, the College and Career Ready Virginia program, or CCRV, was enacted by the 2024 General Assembly, and it was intended to expand access and opportunity to dual enrollment. The program expands this access and opportunity in 2 main ways that became effective in fall of 2025. First, the program requires schools and colleges to offer all qualified high school students with a pathway to complete the UCGS or Passport program. Second, the program requires that UCGS and Passport pathway courses be free to students. CCRV had some other requirements around parental notification, advising, data collection, and planning for the eventual inclusion of CTE courses in the program. To meet CCRV requirements, VCCS directed all colleges to eliminate tuition for UCGS and Passport pathway courses this fall. This was a change for 14 colleges that were charging tuition in the previous year. Additionally, to meet CCRV requirements, colleges are working with school divisions to ensure that every qualified student who wants to complete the UCGS or Passport will have a pathway to do so, but this will require using online courses in many divisions. While offering courses virtually may be an efficient solution to meeting CCRV's requirements, VCCS and DOE will need to closely monitor course quality and outcomes for dual enrollment students in virtual courses. Many stakeholders have cautioned that online learning may not be appropriate for all high school students who are taking accelerated courses. Many more students than those who participate in dual enrollment are eligible to participate. To participate in academic transfer dual enrollment courses, students must be high school juniors or seniors and have a 3.0 GPA. According to data we collected from school divisions for this study, if all eligible students participated in dual enrollment, the number of dual enrollment students would double. However, several factors limit future growth in the number of high school students who are interested in participating in dual enrollment. Those factors include learning loss, lack of demonstrated academic performance, and other advanced course options like AP and IB classes. At the same time, some factors could encourage future growth in dual enrollment. In particular, the state's new accountability framework provides schools with extra points for dual enrollment participation, and CCRV requirements make many dual enrollment classes free to students. Ultimately, the conflicting factors make it difficult to predict how future dual enrollment participation might change. Despite the complications in estimating future dual enrollment demand, doing so is important because creating too much dual enrollment capacity is inefficient. If VCCS and the school districts create courses that students aren't interested in taking, that's wasted effort. And resources used to create unneeded capacity imposes an unnecessary workload and burden on school divisions. Developing an understanding of future demand will require better data and effective coordination among VCCS, DOE, and the school divisions. Finally, CCRV requires VCCS and DOE to establish a work group to develop and recommend an approach to incorporating CTE in the program. Although a work group was convened in October 2024, that work group did not conduct the extensive data collection or issue the detailed recommendations that were envisioned by the legislation. VCCS staff have described this work as ongoing, but this work is essential to any future state where the CCRV program could potentially be expanded to provide more CTE opportunities to high school students. Mr. Chairman, I'll pause here for questions.
Okay, now that should raise some questions here, that part. I don't see. Let me ask you this: if not very many people are participating, if we don't make any changes, it's JLARC's opinion that it probably won't grow anymore without changes. And here's a second part of the question. If you're going to go to a four-year college later, and would this help you get into UVA if you did dual enrollment courses and had some of your required courses taken care of in high school? Would that help you or hurt you? Or maybe playing field hockey again and being the yearbook editor or the newspaper on the newspaper would be better. You'd be a better rounded student to get into, the university. How about that?
Mr. Chairman, that's a good question. I'm not sure I can tell you whether it would help you get into UVA. I do know that most school districts do increase students' GPAs for taking any accelerated courses. So dual enrollment would be one of those courses that would lead to higher GPAs for students. So it would increase their GPAs. It would also provide them with some credit for the dual enrollment courses that they did take to satisfy some general education requirements at whatever four-year public Virginia four-year institution they attend.
So you believe it would help? Is that what you're saying?
It would certainly, it wouldn't hurt.
Pardon me?
It wouldn't hurt.
Would not hurt, okay. So I guess to follow up a little bit, I mean, this is so far, maybe it's because it's so new that we have so little participation in it. And if we didn't do any of your recommendations, what would happen to it in your opinion?
Mr. Chairman, I think the CCRV program is relatively, it only went into effect this fall with providing the free passport and UCGS courses to students.
All right, to be determined.
So it's a little
question.
early to say.
Okay. I'd like to see, Mr. Brown, you're agitating over there.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would just say it's really hard to know what would happen without anything. But as Stephanie said, it's new. But I think one of the things we wanted to bring to the legislature's attention is that there's competing things here that kind of make the aspiration around all high school students taking a lot of college level courses. That, practically speaking, I think is really difficult to accomplish. But between where we are now and that, there's a big gap. So I do think it places a premium on really kind of thinking through so that you don't overbuild. I guess the thing I would say is when you talk to school divisions, they understand that this is important, but they've got a lot of other things that they're trying to kind of handle. And so kind of building this capacity, if it won't be used, I think is maybe an additional burden or potentially inefficient to them. So it's a real balance, but as Stephanie said, it's new.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Senator McDougal.
Could somebody explain to me clearly the 2x2 program where you get automatic admittance into any four-year institution if you maintain certain grade level, and then if you did dual enrollment and you got a significant number of credits, how would the two of those play together?
Senator McDougal, that's a good question. So the 2x2 program is usually for students who enroll in the community college, and typically not your dual enrollment students, where they take 2 years of courses at the community college under a certain pathway that would transfer directly to a four-year institution. And then all of the community colleges have guaranteed transfer agreements with the public four-year institutions. And if students meet certain criteria in terms of their GPA, and sometimes those agreements also have requirements around certain grades you have to have in certain classes, then there's a guaranteed transfer agreement. And so if a student completed those 2 years under that pathway, then those 2 years would transfer to the four-year institution. Dual enrollment and the passport and UCGS class programs are a little bit different in that those that's a 10 class or a 5 class pathway. And they provide students with a menu of options in different blocks, 7 blocks for UCGS, 5 blocks for Passport. And if students complete the courses in those blocks, and they maintain, I think they have to have a C in those classes transfer to public four-year institutions and satisfy all or most of their general education requirements, depending on the university.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Senator McDougal.
so the 2x2 is longer and it gets you guaranteed admission. The dual enrollment actually doesn't have anything specific to do with admission except to show that you're taking advanced courses, but it would reduce your four-year institution bill because you would be done with either all or a portion of your gen ed classes by the time you enter that four-year institution.
Senator McDougal, yes. That's correct.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Delegate Rasul.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Senator McDougal's actual point here, so what I see on slide 42 is that we have 20,000 students approximately that have taken more than 3 courses during this period. Yet less than 2,000 of them on the following slide actually achieved, if I'm reading this correctly, UCGS or passport, which is what would actually guarantee them, Senator McDougal, a 1 semester or 2 semester kind of guarantee into one of these 4-year public institutions. The question is if 20,000 students have taken 3 or more classes, what is the impediment to now less than 2,000 of them actually receiving a guaranteed track to reduce their amount of time in the 4-year institution?
Delegate Rasul, that's a good question, and that's something we actually tried to dig into the data a little bit more to understand what was happening there. And so I think the first thing to keep in mind is that the data that we're showing here is for students who graduated high school in 2024, so it's before the implementation of the CCRV program. The other thing that seemed to be happening in the data to some extent is that students might have been taking several dual enrollment courses, but they weren't in the specific blocks of the UCGS or the passport that they needed to complete that program. So for example, where the UCGS or passport program may only require 1 history class, you would see students taking 2 or 3 history courses, and that's probably because that's what their high school was able to offer because of the teachers that are available to teach dual enrollment. So we think that's likely what was going on, and that's why you see a little bit of a disconnect between the number of dual enrollment courses that students are taking and then the students that actually achieve earning the UCGS for passport.
Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Rasul.
Yeah, so, I'm like the chair of education in the House, and I have a 9th grader and a 10th grader. I'm sitting here trying to figure out what classes they need to take that are not just transferable, but I found out what the problem is, Mr. Chairman. It's like almost all of these universities will transfer in credits. You can take all the credits you want. The problem is applicability. Like they actually having the credits to apply to a degree. And here we have the most basic thing, passport and UCGS, where we struggle. We had this vigorous debate this past session about applicability and trying to improve applicability. Enormous inertia from all across the board on something like that. So I think, the issue is if the, and of course, maybe I'm not the brightest for sure, but if the chairman of education really is struggling to figure this thing out, I don't know how parents are figuring this out. And it's no wonder why so many of these students are taking classes, sometimes wasting money, either our money or the state's money, and us not doing anything about it to help streamline this. So I hope that in the future we'll be able to figure that out and expect more out of the whole system. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, I'm sure. Well, this is a 1-year-old program, 2-year-old program, and the chancellor's here to answer that question in a minute, I think, or where we're going here.
This is, Mr. Chairman, this is before, we're not even talking about the program itself, just historically with dual enrollment and streamlining that.
No. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, and seeing nobody else with their light on, please continue. This is your last segment here.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This last section reviews some issues around revenues and efficiency. Declining enrollment, online learning, shifting enrollment composition, and upcoming demographic changes necessitate that the community colleges operate as efficiently as possible. These changes could significantly impact VCCS's spending and revenue. VCCS is aware of these impacts and the importance of maintaining efficiency. For example, since 2017, the State Board has assessed individual colleges annually using a 4-metric framework that includes their operating efficiency and spending. The system has also attempted to introduce efficiencies through its Shared Services Center, which provides procurement, accounts payable, and travel management services for all colleges. Additionally, several colleges have reported taking actions to cut costs and improve efficiency. We found that enrollment declines and changes in program enrollment are affecting the system's revenues, which may eventually require a fundamental change in the state's approach to funding VCCS. Declining enrollment and the General Assembly's emphasis on student affordability have reduced tuition and fees revenue over time and increased the system's reliance on state general funds. In 2024, state general funds made up 50% of the system's revenues. The shifting proportion of enrollment from academic transfer students adversely affects VCCS's revenues. Historically, VCCS colleges have subsidized CTE programs with academic program revenues. On average, CTE credits cost the system almost double what academic transfer credits cost. When academic transfer students far outnumbered CTE students, this subsidization worked. However, as student enrollment declines in academic transfer programs and increases in CTE programs, the subsidization will no longer work as well to cover a college's total costs. If the current enrollment trends continue, VCCS revenue will increasingly make up a lower proportion of costs, which could stress the system financially. These revenue dynamics are not unique to Virginia community colleges. Some other states, notably Texas and North Carolina, have begun exploring alternate funding models for their community colleges to address this issue. Next, we found that small colleges experience efficiency challenges, and regions with more small colleges spend more per student. Some VCCS colleges have very small enrollments that make it more difficult to operate efficiently, especially when responding to declining enrollment. Half of all VCCS colleges have enrollment at or below 2,200 full-time equivalent students. These colleges tend to be in less populated and rural areas of the state. Additionally, these small colleges also tend to rely more on dual enrollment students for their enrollment. However, because these colleges are still independent colleges, they have certain fixed costs. These small colleges also tend to have small class sizes, which makes it difficult for them to generate revenue. Finally, fewer students are on campus because of enrollment declines, dual enrollment, and online learning. As a result, many small schools have reduced space utilization. Slide 57 shows average spending by college size. VCCS's smallest 3 colleges have the highest per student spending of all colleges in the system. The largest VCCS colleges, Northern Virginia and Tidewater, have the lowest spending, averaging $13,000 per FTE. Slide 58 shows average college spending per FTE by GO region. Spending per student in regions served by 1 or 2 colleges is 20% lower than in regions served by 3 or 4 colleges. For example, Northern Virginia is served by just 1 community college with 6 campuses. Northern Virginia Community College, the system's largest college, has the system's second lowest spending at $12,500 per FTE. This is despite this community college being located in the state's highest cost region. Conversely, regions with more and smaller colleges have higher spending per student than regions with fewer and larger colleges. For example, the far southwest region has 4 smaller colleges and has the state's highest average spending per student. VCCS has opportunities to improve efficiency at smaller colleges without necessarily requiring college consolidation or closure. This slide lists a few opportunities the system could consider to increase regionalization and improve efficiency and effectiveness at small colleges. These opportunities would involve regional cooperation and coordination among smaller colleges for some services, and the scaling back of some operations and services currently provided by individual colleges. The broad adoption of virtual education and services across VCCS colleges makes some of these opportunities more viable than they would have been even just a few years ago. The report recommends that the State Board for Community Colleges direct VCCS staff to initiate a strategic review and propose a plan for how the system can more efficiently and effectively deliver services, especially in regions with smaller colleges. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my prepared remarks, and I'd be happy to take additional questions.
Babs? I don't see anybody's light on. Okay. Okay.
Right.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And are you going to introduce our next speaker? Or?
Yes. Okay. All right.
Good morning, Stephanie.
Oh, sorry. It's the chancellor. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, good morning, Mr. Chancellor. Is this the first time you've been before JLARC in your service here in the Commonwealth?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your background?
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, members of JLARC. My name is David Doré. I've been with the Virginia Community College System about 2.5 years now. I came from Arizona. I spent 10 years in the Arizona system as a president there, and prior to Arizona, I spent about 20 years in the California Community College System. And before that, I was in the university system, but I saw the light, and my passion brought me to the community colleges.
Thank you very
And
much.
it's been wonderful being in Virginia.
Okay, very good. Good answer.
So Chair Sickles, Vice Chair Locke, esteemed members of JLARC, thank you for your thorough and thoughtful study of the Virginia Community College system. As Chancellor, I'm leading a bold vision for our 23 colleges, one focused on maximizing impact, improving efficiency, and driving cost effectiveness. Our Accelerate Opportunity Strategic Plan and the VCCS One System Strategy align closely with the state's goals, focusing on 3 key areas. First, increased access to dual enrollment. We want more students to get a head start on their education, opening doors earlier. Second, improved efficiency. By using regional models and optimizing our space, we reduce duplication, align programs with local labor markets, and create clearer pathways for students. And third, stronger outcomes. Data-driven decisions and outcomes-based funding ensure that public dollars go to programs that work. Now, to support these goals, we are advancing several key initiatives. First, transparency and accountability, publishing outcomes and holding programs accountable. Funding and resource allocation, reviewing fund balances to ensure that every dollar is used wisely. Opportunity and access, streamlining instructor pathways for dual enrollment to expand opportunities without sacrificing rigor. Data-driven decision-making, using high-quality data to guide every decision. Outcomes-based funding, exploring ways to tie resources to credential attainment, employment, and wage progression. Collaboration and partnerships, working across the VCCS, SHEV, our K-12 school divisions, and industry to drive student success. I also want to express my sincere appreciation for JLARC's work. Your team's engagement and review, captured in the exposure draft, quickly recognized our unique mission. We are in many ways the swift boats in the sea of higher education, bringing our mission directly to the people who need us, efficiently and in alignment with the modern economy. The report's recommendations reaffirm our commitment to continuous improvement. Ensuring access for all Virginians, including those in rural areas. Conducting a strategic review to deliver services efficiently, particularly at our smaller colleges. And strengthening the consistency, accountability, accessibility, and effectiveness of community college education. I am pleased to acknowledge that the report's alignment with and affirmation to my own vision for Virginia's 23 community colleges, a vision centered on delivering consistent, high-quality, future-ready education and robust workforce development programs to every Virginian. The findings and recommendations I received in draft form reinforce our shared dedication to ensuring that every student has access to the opportunities they need to succeed in a rapidly evolving economy. Moreover, the importance of an efficient, transparent, and unified community college system cannot be overstated. As we look ahead, the Virginia Community College System remains steadfast in its commitment to continuous improvement and accountability, always striving to meet the needs of our students, employers, and communities. With the release of this report, I will work closely with the State Board for Community Colleges in reviewing and prioritizing the report's recommendations. I'd also like to address a couple of questions that you may have. Online learning. Our colleges meet students where they are, using online courses to provide flexible, effective instruction. And more of adult learners need the kinds of flexibility that hybrid and online and high flex courses provide. The need for 23 colleges. Access remains our priority. but we are reviewing our model to ensure efficiency, especially at smaller colleges with high cost per student. In closing, thank you for your leadership and for advancing this important conversation. I look forward to working together to shape the future of Virginia's community colleges, making them stronger, more efficient, and more impactful for every student we serve. Thank you.
Mr. Chancellor, is there any recommendation that was made in this report that you disagree with?
No, Mr. Chair. I think that JLARC really affirmed the direction that I believe the community college system needs to move.
In a specific one, they want a longer-term assessment of the outcomes.
Yes.
Yeah, and you can do that.
Well, we certainly are interested in getting more data and again, working with the Commonwealth to ensure that we can, particularly I think that was around fast forward and tracking further out. We know that those students in terms of that short-term employment are getting into a higher wage position. One of the aspects of fast forward that I would point out, however, is for some students that may be all that they need, but for many students, the fast forward is entry, and they do need to come back to the community college system for more advanced credentials and certificates.
Okay, here's a softball. How do you work with our business community to make sure that you're providing the skilled workers that they need?
Yeah, well, just last week on Friday, we held our third statewide sector summit that was on IT and cybersecurity. And so one of the things, each of our colleges work very, very closely with their local workforce boards, and I think our colleges do an excellent job. But at a state level, we've been holding sector summits. Our first one was in the healthcare, our second one was in the skilled trades, and then this third one has been in IT and cyber. So we're working really, I look at this as two approaches. Regionally, the colleges are collaborating with those local industries, and then I'm looking at that big picture using VOIC data, working with sort of these statewide strategies to say, where in Virginia do we need to really align better? And I would say my number one goal is really focused on alignment with the labor market needs of the Commonwealth, and I think that's really what our strategic plan is all about in terms of not just making sure that our students, enrollment is not the goal, right? The goal is, and I would even argue that a credential is not even the goal. The goal for most everyone is a job, and so that alignment with our credentials, with our degrees, really to the needs of Virginia, and I think that's where the system is, frankly, in order to meet that need, is going to experience some disequilibrium. The JLARC staff talked about these high-cost programs, and interestingly enough, that's where we need to grow. And so the challenge, I think, for each of the colleges in terms of this equilibrium, you've got some low-cost programs and you've got some high-cost programs. Mostly, in terms of the students on campus, it's not the low-cost programs that are growing. And really, the demand for Virginia is to grow the high-cost programs.
So one of the high-cost programs, I believe, is nursing, and we have
Correct.
a huge nursing shortage, and we have lots of colleges in Virginia that offer nursing. How are you all working together with the four-year schools, your schools at Virginia?
Yes, so I'll first talk about how we're working together. And you talked about one of the programs you said it was at Germanna, the heavy equipment. Actually, a model that I believe we're going to grow more, which we actually do with Germanna, is we have a lead college. And then that college will have the program level accreditation, but then we can disperse that program to some of the surrounding colleges. And we're doing that now in some of these high cost areas. Dental hygiene is a great example. That's extremely, and as nursing, very, very high cost program. What we're doing is one college will be the if you will, the center of excellence, and we'll do some of that, the actual instructing didactically, virtually, and then the student can have those clinical placements in their local area.
Okay, terrific. I don't see any lights on from any of the commissioners here. Thank you so much. I appreciate your close attention to this study and all the work you're going to do. to modernize our system and make it as efficient as possible.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members of JLARC.
Okay, now it's your turn. Tracy.
Good morning,
Ms. Smith.
Mr. Chairman. I'm so sorry about that, and apologies to the Chancellor.
We're losing half our audience.
I know.
Maybe we can wait 1 second till the noise,
We'll get folks settled a little bit.
yeah. Okay. Wow. I should have introduced the mayor of Norfolk. I didn't know he was going to leave. I know.
Mr. Chairman, obviously the rest of the crowd is not interested in capital funding either.
Okay. Well, we greatly appreciate everybody who stayed. Want you all to know that. Okay. Ms. Smith, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Apologies again for the earlier intrusion. I really need to watch my caffeine intake, apparently. Looking forward to all the teasing that I'll get back at the office. Mr. Chairman, my name is Tracy Smith, and I'm one of JLARC's associate directors, and I supervised our study of the state's capital maintenance and construction. Before I turn the podium over to Lauren Excel to present her team's findings and recommendations to you, I just wanted to take a minute to express our thanks to the staff of DGS, DPB, and SHEV. The staff at all three agencies devoted a lot of time to helping us with our research, really thinking through some of the more complicated aspects of this study. I also want to thank, of course, the many state agencies and higher education institutions who spent a lot of time responding to requests for data and information, and also spent a lot of time in some very in-depth interviews with our staff. Mr. Chairman, our report has a number of findings and recommendations that Lauren is going to walk you through in a moment, but we don't want you to lose sight of the fact that the General Assembly, the governor, and agency leaders and staff have taken important steps toward improving how the Commonwealth's capital assets are managed and maintained over time. For example, the General Assembly has increased the amount of funding appropriated to agencies and higher education institutions to better maintain state buildings and to avoid costly repairs and replacements. DGS has developed IT systems to record and track various data on state-owned buildings and capital projects, and it's also managed an increasing number of capital projects on behalf of agencies. State agencies and higher eds themselves have managed the replacement of badly deteriorated state facilities, and some have developed some pretty sophisticated approaches to keeping tabs on the conditions of their buildings so that they can be more proactive about maintaining them. However, Mr. Chairman, additional steps are needed to strengthen the state's capital maintenance program and to make it more strategic, and to improve the management and efficiency of the capital construction process. To achieve those goals, we do have a number of recommendations, and some of them would require additional general funds for state agency staff positions and also for third-party expertise and analysis. But we certainly are aware of the current fiscal constraints and think that these additional investments could be made incrementally and done over time as resources permit. So, Mr. Chairman, without further ado, I'd now like to introduce Lauren Excel to go over her team's findings and recommendations for you.
Welcome, Ms. Excel.
Thank you, Tracy. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. As Tracy
Good to
said,
see you back.
thank you. As Tracy said, I'm Lauren Excel, and I was the project leader for our review of capital maintenance and construction. And I want to thank my team, Christine Wolf, Sarah Burdey-Sachs, and Madison McCaffrey for all their hard work on this review. Our capital study covered several topics, including the state's process for identifying, planning for, and funding projects to maintain existing state-owned buildings and construct new ones, the availability and usability of data on building condition, roles of key stakeholders in the state's capital processes, and reasons some capital projects are not completed on time. The key findings for this review are that Virginia does not have centralized data on the actual condition of state-owned buildings, which limits visibility into agencies' capital needs. State funding for maintenance projects has increased over time, but the total amount of funding appropriated isn't enough to address all of the state's maintenance needs. The data used to allocate state maintenance reserve funding isn't always complete or accurate, which makes it difficult to direct funding to agencies with the greatest needs. And finally, capital outlay projects are prolonged for several reasons, some of which could be avoided. There are 4 sections to my presentation this morning, Mr. Chairman. I'll start things off by providing some background information on Virginia's capital assets. Virginia has a large portfolio of state-owned buildings. Examples include office buildings, correctional facilities, higher ed dormitories, and warehouses, just to name a few. There are at least 7,600 state-owned buildings that have permanent systems like plumbing, electrical, and HVAC, according to available data. DGS manages many of the state's buildings, meaning they are responsible for tracking and addressing needed repairs and maintenance. At least 53 agencies also manage state-owned buildings. And as a quick side note, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to be referencing agencies a lot this morning. For this presentation, agencies often include state agencies and public higher education institutions, but to keep things simple, I'm just going to refer to them as agencies. Some agencies have a larger building footprint than others. Agencies' total square footage ranges from about 6,800 square feet to 13.7 million square feet. The 3 agencies with the most square footage are the University of Virginia, Virginia Department of Corrections, and Virginia Tech. Having a large footprint matters because more square footage means the agency has numerous capital projects and requires large amounts of state funding. Executive branch and legislative branch entities have capital-related roles. Starting with DGS, they review and approve capital projects at certain stages, maintain the state's central database of building data called MRFIX, and manage some capital outlay projects. DPB is another key entity. They review agencies' capital budget requests, release appropriations during capital outlay projects, and review maintenance reserve spending annually. I also have some information on Money Committee staff and SHEV if you're interested, but I'll skip ahead to SIXPAC. SIXPAC is a group that includes DGS, DPB, Money Committee staff directors, SHEV, and the Secretary of Finance. SIXPAC is responsible for reporting a list of the state's previously approved capital outlay projects to the General Assembly each year, and they review and approve certain types of capital outlay projects at various stages. Legislators aren't on this slide, even though they also have essential roles determining the total amount of state maintenance reserve funding each year and approving funding for individual capital outlay projects. And I'll talk more about those things in later slides. Slide 8 shows the state's 3 different funding mechanisms to address capital needs of different size and complexity. The state provides maintenance reserve funds for maintenance projects that meet certain criteria and cost between $25,000 and $2 million, or up to $4 million for roof replacements. The state also provides capital outlay funds for large maintenance and new construction projects that cost $3 million or more, or create 5,000 square feet of building space for new construction. And finally, the state also provides operating funds for maintenance and new construction projects that don't meet the criteria for either maintenance reserve or capital outlay funding. These are typically small routine maintenance projects like painting or grounds upkeep. Some capital projects fall between the $2 million and $3 million cost parameters for maintenance reserve and capital outlay, and DPB helps agencies determine which funding mechanism to use in those cases. As for the amount of funding, the majority of general fund capital appropriations go towards maintenance and improvement of existing buildings. This pie chart on slide 7 breaks down state general fund capital appropriations for the current biennium. And as you can see, nearly 70% of funding went to projects to improve existing buildings and address maintenance needs. This is good news from a maintenance standpoint and reflects a deliberate effort by the legislature and governor to invest in our existing state buildings. Mr. Chairman, I'll stop here in case there are any questions.
I do not see any lights on. Okay, please proceed.
My next section is on the maintenance of state-owned buildings. Maintenance is important because it helps address problems early before they become emergencies that negatively affect agency operations and customer services. It also can save the state money in the long run because the longer maintenance is deferred, repairs become more costly and extensive. And things that could have been initially been repaired may need to be replaced if maintenance is not done in a timely manner. The first thing we found related to maintenance is that the state currently does not have centralized data on the actual condition of state-owned buildings or the total extent of deferred maintenance. This limits the state's ability to make proactive and strategic maintenance investments and avoid costly building repairs and replacements. DGS's MR-Fix database, which is the state's central repository of data on state-owned buildings and systems, has some information which is self-reported by agencies. MR-Fix was developed internally by DGS staff and includes things like building type, square footage, age, and presumed system lifespan, which is the assumption for how long a system has before it expires. According to the MR-Fix data, some building systems are 20 or more years past their presumed lifespans. This bar chart shows the percentage of presumed expired systems that are 20 or more years past their presumed expiration date. As you can see at the top of the figure, interior finishes, HVAC, and plumbing have the largest percentages of systems 20 or more years past their presumed expiration date. MR-Fix data also shows that half of state-owned buildings are considered old. Buildings are typically considered old if they're around 50 years old or more. Based on how the MR-Fix data are broken out, we can see that 50% of buildings were built before 1978 and are at least 46 or more years old. Although MR-Fix data provides some insight into state-owned buildings, it doesn't include information on actual building condition. Actual building condition reflects a building's current state as observed during a recent facility condition assessment. MR-Fix doesn't have this. Instead, it has data on presumed expiration date and age. These are only proxies for actual building condition, though, because building systems can last more or less time than expected dates, and old buildings that are well maintained may not have a lot of maintenance needs at all. MR-Fix was not initially designed to have data on actual building condition, according to DGS staff, but actual condition data could be added. Collecting data on actual building condition is important, according to experts. Experts recommend conducting facility condition assessments to collect building condition information and using a measure of facility condition that allows for apples-to-apples comparisons across facilities. And just to make sure we're all on the same page, Mr. Chairman, when I say facility condition assessments, I mean having a qualified individual inspect the condition of buildings and their systems and identify the maintenance needs. Some agencies do already do this, especially large higher ed institutions, but others do not because they don't have staff to do the assessments or the resources to hire a third party to do them. Several Virginia localities and other states, including North Carolina and Maryland, do collect and track centralized data on actual building condition through assessments. Virginia needs data on actual building condition to make cost-effective and strategic capital decisions. The total extent and cost of the state's deferred maintenance is currently not known. Having building condition data would help agencies do things like document total deferred maintenance needs, try to avoid unexpected replacements and repairs by addressing them proactively, and use a data-driven approach to deciding whether to maintain or replace existing buildings. These things could help the state potentially avoid future costs because the most significant maintenance needs would be identified and addressed before conditions get worse and more costly. Although it would have significant benefits, collecting information on actual building condition would take time and resources. Therefore, the state could have agencies complete assessments incrementally, starting first with agencies that don't already do these assessments and have large square footage or older buildings. I have 3 examples of agencies that meet these criteria and a range of what it could cost to do assessments for them at the bottom of slide 18. But there are a variety of agencies the state could choose to assess first. Our next maintenance-related finding is that although the state maintenance reserve funding has increased over time, the current level of appropriated funding is not enough to cover all of the state's maintenance needs. Before I unpack that finding, slide 20 shows the types of projects that are eligible for state maintenance reserve funding. There are some exceptions to this, but as the blue bar shows, maintenance reserve funding can be used for projects that cost between $25,000 and $2 million, except for roof replacements, which can cost up to $4 million. Eligible types of projects include repairing or replacing built-in equipment like elevators, structural components like masonry, or utility systems like electrical and water. There are several other eligible uses described on this slide.
How much money are we spending on this type of project when the building just should be replaced? I mean,
Mr. Chairman, that number, unfortunately, I wish we had that, but we do have data on how much the state is appropriating for maintenance reserve funding each year, and we do have some breakouts by agency for how much they're able to spend each year.
I mean, if Senator Deeds and I have been in our hospitals, and the HVAC systems, and it is just, embarrassing what we're spending to keep some of these buildings open when they should have been replaced maybe decades ago, some of them. And then when we do try to build one, it lasts for decades too, like in Petersburg. The project will never end. But anyway, thank you. Sorry for interrupting. Yeah, Delegate Wilt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since you broke the ice with a question, if I could. So in your criteria, have it been considered on any particular facility, the actual usage of that facility? How often is it used? By whom? And that it seems that would be an important thing to consider going forward. I mean, yeah.
Delegate, well, as far as my understanding goes, the state's maintenance reserve funding just has eligibility criteria that are based on how much a project costs and then what type of project it is. We do have some information in the report, though, on building utilization data. Right now, the state currently collects some of that, Chev does, for higher education institutions on classroom and lab utilization. But the state does not collect, centrally at least, a lot of information on how different spaces are used. So we have a policy option in the report for the state, if it's interested, to consider collecting more information on office space. That's a place you could start, at least, to start to learn more about how much particular spaces are used.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to point you all to, there's an appendix that we have in the report, Appendix E. It doesn't exactly answer your question in terms of how much are we spending in maintenance on buildings that maybe should ultimately be replaced, but it does give you a list by agency, the age of the average age of buildings, what the maintenance funding, the total amount of maintenance funding the agency has received. And so it might help you connect some dots to answer that particular question.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else here? Okay. Yeah, please continue, Ms. Excel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Despite increases, agencies have more maintenance reserve funding needs than available funding. Funding appropriated for maintenance projects has generally increased over time, growing 23% between fiscal year 19 and fiscal year 26. However, despite the increase, a majority of agencies indicated they did not receive enough maintenance reserve funding in fiscal year 24 for essential projects. 12 agencies that have a majority of state building square footage reported over $1 billion in unfunded maintenance reserve project needs. To be strategic about the way the state funds maintenance needs and better track our progress towards addressing them, the state could set a goal for its annual maintenance investment. The goal could be to fund a percentage of the state's total maintenance reserve project needs each year. And to do that, the state would need to quantify the cost of agencies' total maintenance reserve project needs, which DGS could assist with. Having this type of a goal would help ensure the appropriations for maintenance projects are informed by the state's total amount of maintenance needs, and it would allow better tracking of progress towards maintenance backlogs over time. Mr. Chairman, we have several recommendations to address the maintenance-related findings that I've shared so far. First, for the General Assembly to require and provide funding for agencies to complete facility condition assessments so the state has reliable data on actual building conditions and maintenance needs. Assessments should be prioritized initially for agencies that don't already complete them but have large square footage and/or older buildings. We have a related recommendation in the report that describes how DGS would help with this effort. Then we also have a recommendation for six-pack to establish a goal for what proportion of the total combined maintenance reserve project costs should be funded through state maintenance reserve appropriations each year. If you'll recall, six-pack has both legislative and executive branch members, so the goal would be set with input from multiple individuals.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator McPike.
Thank you. So maybe I appreciate your work on this. Maybe you could step us through what the presentation is saying. As I understand it, it's saying that, well, there's been funding increases over the last couple of years. There's still a significant deficit. The definition of that deficit is still up in the air because we don't have the data set to tell us like what the actual number is. Is that correct?
That's correct, Senator McPike.
And follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir, Senator McPike.
So the next sort of steps is we have put in places things like six-pack and other groups to help guide the General Assembly and guide projects, which is great. But without the right data, Mr. Chairman, I think you and others do not want to get into another DBHDS situation where you do have, frankly, horrid conditions, and unless we get that data set, we could set ourselves up for that same failure in the future. Can you walk us through real quick, like, how do we get those data sets in place? How do we prevent and have a wider picture of what we're actually spending or not spending, and how to, do we set 1%? But 1%, if we don't define of what yet, we don't know what percent or 2 or 3% to invest in our capital funds means.
Thank you for that question, Senator McPike. There are a few key steps that would need to be done to achieve this and to have better insight into the state's total maintenance needs. The first step really is doing these facility condition assessments to better understand what the actual condition of the state's buildings are. Once those are done, for each agency, you would have better data on what the maintenance needs are. And each agency should then be able to work with DGS to come up with the total cost of their maintenance needs. Once all of that is aggregated, then you would have a total number for the state to know what that total maintenance need is across all state agencies and higher education institutions. And then with that, you could set a goal, depending on what the policy goal is that six-pack would determine, for how much the state would want to invest in that. Right now, the funding for state maintenance reserve is about $200 million per year. So you could set a goal at any different percentage depending on how much you would want to increase that. And you could do so with clear vision into what that total number is for what the state needs to do.
Good. Delegate Tata, and then Senator Deeds.
Thank you. And kind of a follow-up to that, it seems to me, Mr. Chairman, that to start with, we have to know what everyone's doing. So the centralized data collection to me would be a priority. And localities, do we know the Virginia localities that are already doing it? Do we know what these other states, how they are doing that is something we could apply here?
Delegate Tata, we did speak with just a couple of Virginia localities, the biggest ones, Fairfax and City of Alexandria, to try and learn a little bit more about the assessments. And these are things that they are doing. It sounds like sometimes staff are hired to do them. Sometimes they work with third-party consultants. We also looked at some other states, including our neighbors, North Carolina, Maryland. I believe we also have some information on Montana and Nevada in our report. And seeing that they have put money aside specifically to do these facility condition assessments. Again, I think it's a little bit of a mix whether they hire staff to do this full time, so state employees, or whether they're working with third-party individuals. But it seems like they are focusing on the assessments themselves to get this data.
Delegate Tata.
Follow up about so once they are doing these assessments, how do they bring it all together and everyone's able to access these? How do they centralize this data?
Delegate Tata, I'm going to look to my team and ask them to add if I'm missing anything from our conversations with some of these states. But it's my understanding that they would aggregate this information into a state database. I think that varies depending on the state or even the locality, what they use. But somehow collecting information on what the actual conditions of the buildings are. And then I think it would also just depend on the locality or the state, how they then decide to work through them. We do know that Sometimes in the private sector, especially, they are encouraged to set goals. Sometimes that's based on the replacement value of the buildings and investing a certain percentage into that. And our goal is a little bit different of an idea because it would factor in exactly what the state needs to do, total maintenance needs. But the idea of a goal is also something that is talked about. So perhaps some states do that as well.
Okay. Senator Deeds.
I was looking at table E2, I guess, and trying to figure out, it says that there was maintenance reserve appropriated in previous years, plus the newly appropriated maintenance reserve. Previous years is almost 249 million. 264 is newly appropriated for this year, I guess. So, and then you have a total, and then you have a spent column. Is a spent column for the new dollars, or the spent column for all the dollars? And if it's for all the dollars, that would indicate that there's kind of a problem with getting a dollar spent. We don't have people to do the work, or.
Senator Deeds, thank you. Yes, the percentage spent is for the total amount that each agency or public higher education has. And we break down, you'll see in that E2 table, we have percentage spent and then percentage obligated. And we have some information in Chapter 4 of our report to talk about the fact that for a lot of these agencies in higher eds, you see that they are not able to spend the majority of their state maintenance reserve funding. When we spoke with them, because some of these numbers are fairly large and we're hearing they have need, a number of them told us it's because they have these multi-year projects going on where the funding is obligated but not technically spent yet. So they've already done the procurements, they've hired the contractors, and the work is underway, but they've not spent the funding. So we have some recommendations in the report that talk about getting a little bit more information on what is actually obligated, not just spent. But I will also say we did talk to a few agencies where staffing is a concern and they don't have the staff to fully mobilize the funds. And some are also saving for emergencies or saving up for a particular project.
Mr. Chair, and I don't know if I missed this or not. How much of these this need is based on on assessments that these agencies have done?
Senator Deeds, some of the larger higher ed institutions especially, and just a handful of state agencies actually assess their actual building condition and needs. So some of them are working off of information on actual need. Others, they have lists of projects that they need to do, but they haven't necessarily had someone in to inspect and fully catalog all the maintenance repair needs. So it really varies, but a lot of the higher eds have better data than the agencies.
Mr. Chair, yeah, just anecdotally, I know of a couple of projects in the private sector that are ongoing, and contractors got a call from Homeland Security that they're going to come by and check the workforce, and I'm wondering if we have any anecdotal evidence of that sort of thing happening in any projects in the state.
Senator Deeds, we did speak to a number of agencies and higher eds for this study, and a couple of them mentioned challenges with timelines with contractors, but no one really brought up that particular issue. That said, we weren't able to interview everyone.
Thank you, Jim.
Don't see anybody else's light on? Okay, please continue.
And on slide 25, when we discussed the possibility of setting a maintenance investment goal and increasing state maintenance reserve funding with stakeholders, concerns were raised that some agencies wouldn't be able to spend additional maintenance reserve funds because they have unspent funds at the end of each fiscal year. And this gets to exactly what Senator Deeds was just asking about. When we asked agencies, as I mentioned, a number had unspent funds because they were saving up for emergencies or needed projects, or they had a large portion obligated to ongoing multi-year projects. Some did say that they just didn't have the staff to fully mobilize the funding, though.
Is that money in their bank accounts now, or is it still in the Treasury here in Richmond?
Mr. Chairman, that is a good technical question. I think I'd have to double check with DPB on that one.
I'm curious on who's getting the interest on this money. Okay, thanks.
It sounds like Treasury would be where it is. Okay. It's important to ensure maintenance reserve allocations to agencies are informed by agency spending, but more information is needed to better understand why each agency has unspent funds. And so we have some recommendations to that effect in our written report. The next maintenance-related finding is that the MR-Fix data that is used to allocate state maintenance reserve funding to agencies is not always complete or accurate, which makes it difficult to ensure funding is allocated to agencies with the greatest maintenance needs. Slide 27 shows how DGS's formula for allocating maintenance reserve funding works, including the fact that it focuses on buildings and expired systems. The formula starts by taking the total amount of maintenance reserve funding the state allocates in a given year, and then allocates it to agencies using shares. Each building an agency has gets shares based on things like the number and type of presumed expired systems that the building has, what it's used for, and its location, which are pulled from the MR-Fix data. An agency's shares are totaled and then multiplied by a total state funding to get each agency's preliminary allocation of funding. And then DPB and Money Committee staff make adjustments as needed, and agency allocations are finalized. As you saw in the previous slide, agency building data in MR-Fix is used to determine how much state maintenance reserve funding agencies get, but when we looked at the data, we saw that it's incomplete and inaccurate in some cases. Specifically, at least 485 buildings are missing system data, which is needed for state maintenance reserve funding calculations. In addition, over a quarter of agencies that responded to a JLARC request were not confident in the accuracy of their MR-Fix data, and we found several inconsistencies ourselves when working with the data for this study that would affect funding calculations. Importantly, DGS is currently working with a consultant on a one-time audit of MR-Fix to improve the data. In its current state, MR-Fix data can lead to some agencies getting more or less than their fair share of funding, which works against the purpose of the shares calculations. DGS's audit has identified several inaccuracies that have been corrected in the database for multiple agencies. Given the importance of this data and the fact that the audit did identify errors, routine audits would improve the data reliability over time, which is why we have a recommendation in the report for the General Assembly to consider providing funding for DGS to hire a consultant to review MR-Fix data at least every 5 years. The last finding in this section is that the state's formula for allocating state maintenance reserve funding does not focus on the state's actual or most pressing maintenance needs. The current formula does seem like an improvement from allocating funds just based on building square footage, which is how things used to be done. Still, the current formula could be further improved. The biggest example of that is the fact that the formula focuses on systems that are presumed to be expired. Presumed expiration dates are generic and do not account for varied lifespans of systems. For example, all roofs are assumed to have a 20-year expiration date, even though some types of roofs, like slate or metal, have longer lifespans. In practice, that means some agencies are getting more than their fair share of funding for roofs that aren't actually expired, and some may be getting less if their roofs have problems before 20 years. Allocating funding based on more accurate expiration dates or the actual condition of systems would better target maintenance reserve funds. The formula for allocating state maintenance reserve funding also does not focus on the most important needs. Specifically, it includes some buildings agencies have identified as underutilized or surplus, which means the buildings are not in full use. While these buildings do need basic maintenance to keep conditions safe, maintenance reserve funding is typically intended for large maintenance projects and not routine upkeep. We have several recommendations in our report for DGS to improve the formula for maintenance reserve funding allocations by developing more precise expected building lifespan benchmarks, excluding underutilized and surplus buildings, and basing agency funding on the actual condition of buildings when that information is available. Mr. Chairman, I know that was a long section, so I'll pause here.
I don't see anybody here. It just happens that I was at a state-owned facility recently where a building's going to be torn down and no one's going to occupy it again. and DGS is requiring them to keep the systems operating on it and spend money on it, even though no one's ever going to be in it again. Just FYI.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Pike.
Thank you. I think the report has something on mothballed facilities, and you do have some minimal upkeep. My question is around the total cost of what we know today. It's my understanding that in some of the tables, Table E, we show a roughly replacement value of our total 7,600 or so buildings at like $46 billion. So my question is, industry standards in terms of capital renewal range between like 1% and 3%. Is that right?
That's correct, Senator McPike.
So using the math, we have 46 billion worth of an asset. That would say 460 million per year is like the lowest minimal level of effort. And it's my understanding that we are about half of that, about 0.5%. Is that correct?
That would be correct, Senator McPike, if you're just looking at the estate maintenance reserve funding. We did look a little bit into the renewal piece, and there are a number of capital outlay projects that would also be in the maintenance vein. That's correct.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you. Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My next section is about capital outlay projects. Capital outlay projects are major capital projects that are individually authorized through the budget. They can be for new construction as well as maintenance, equipment purchases, demolition, or property acquisition. And they typically cost $3 million or more and involve 5,000 or more square feet for new construction. Capital outlay projects have three main phases, starting with the budget request authorization. The Governor and General Assembly decide through the budget process which of agencies' requested capital outlay projects should be funded. Next, authorized projects enter the design phase, which includes working with architects and engineers to develop and refine project plans and drawings. After designs have been developed, projects begin the construction phase, and projects are subject to multiple reviews and approvals by DGS and DPB during the design and construction phases. Virginia currently has 525 capital outlay projects that are open and underway. An example of an open project is VCCS's project to improve accessibility at Tidewater Community College, which was first authorized in 2023 and was approved for $8 million in state funding. Another example of an open project is DBHDS's project to improve safety and security at Eastern State Hospital, which was first authorized in 2024 and was approved for $24 million in state funding. And those are just two of many examples. When looking at Virginia's capital outlay projects, one thing we found is that many projects take longer than 5 years to complete, with some exceeding a decade. Capital outlay project delays matter because they can increase costs and make it difficult for agencies to provide government services. We talked to a variety of stakeholders who emphasized that costs increase when capital outlay projects exceed their originally expected timeframes. Designs sometimes have to be revised, and construction costs increase over time, especially in recent years. This means that the state ends up paying more for delayed projects than it would if projects were finished sooner. Delayed projects can also make it difficult for the public to access needed services, and they can sometimes increase the potential for dangerous and inhospitable work environments. So it's clear that delayed capital outlay projects can cause problems, but how delayed are Virginia's projects? Slide 41 shows the data for recently closed projects, and the takeaway here is that many exceeded 5 years, which is a common industry benchmark for large capital projects. Some exceeded 10 years. It's worth noting that many of these projects were affected in some way by the pandemic, but there are other things that cause delays that I'll explain more shortly. Slide 42 shows similar data, but for open projects that are currently in the construction phase. Many of these projects have already exceeded 5 years, even though they're still in progress. A lot of things cause project delays, including things that are outside of the state's control, like pandemic-related delays. We've focused our research on things within the state's control, though, because that's where our recommendations can add value. When we looked into the root causes of capital outlay project delays within the state's control, two key findings emerged. First, that insufficient agency staff expertise and capacity contribute to capital outlay project delays. Second, although DGS and DPB capital outlay project reviews are critical, they do sometimes add time to projects. Starting with the first finding, some capital outlay projects are delayed because agency staff make mistakes submitting documents like designs or funding requests to DGS and DPB for review. Common mistakes include submitting incomplete materials, resubmitting materials without fixing all issues, and not doing key steps in the process. These mistakes stem from inadequate knowledge of the state's complex capital outlay process and policies, as well as inadequate project management skills. In addition to making mistakes with document submissions, agencies can also delay capital outlay projects in other ways, such as changing the scope of projects or delaying project initiation. Agency leaders sometimes decide to change a project scope after it's authorized, which triggers the project to go back through the state's budget process. Agencies also wait to initiate projects in some cases, typically because of staff capacity or changing financial circumstances. There are currently no minimum qualifications or mandatory training or exams needed for agency staff to manage capital outlay projects. DGS has several certification programs that touch on capital, but none are required or intended specifically for the staff managing capital outlay projects. VITA does things a bit differently and has detailed standards outlining the qualifications, training, and exams project managers must complete before managing IT projects. Given the size and complexity of capital outlay projects, it seems prudent for DGS to establish mandatory qualifications, training, and exams for capital outlay project managers. The rest of the slide and slide 48 describe how DGS should do that in a way that mirrors the way VITA handles IT project management. The state could also better ensure the timeliness of capital outlay projects by having DGS manage more projects. DGS currently manages at least 13 capital outlay projects for agencies. These projects are either ones that were specifically mentioned in the budget or ones they agreed to take on voluntarily at an agency's request. Going forward, DGS should manage projects when agencies have especially costly or complex projects but lack a qualified project manager. DGS leadership have emphasized that they will need additional project management staff to do this, but hopefully that need can be kept manageable if the criteria dictating when a project is managed by DGS is carefully crafted. We have a recommendation for the General Assembly to consider requiring DGS to be the capital outlay project manager in certain cases.
I have a question, Ms. Exel. So a decade or so ago, our bigger universities took this on themselves. So they became different levels and got more authority because they were so frustrated by the DGS process. They wanted to be freed up from all our regulations. How's that going? Is that working better at level 3 universities? Is it working better there than it is the rest of government?
Mr. Chairman, we did ask around to see how well individual public higher eds and agencies are doing, especially the higher eds with the delegated authority and the way they're managing capital outlay projects. And we did hear some good things about specific higher education institutions, particularly those that are well-resourced and have a lot of staff dedicated to this type of function, seem to navigate the state's process well. And there's some things that they also don't need to do because of the delegated authority. They do it within their own staff. So we did hear some positive things about that, but I think it varies by public higher ed institution.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, and so we have that recommendation on slide 50 for DGS to manage a few additional capital outlay projects. I've talked a lot about the ways that agencies add time to capital outlay projects, but there are also ways that central state entities like DGS and DPB can add time to projects, primarily through their reviews. Capital outlay projects must receive approval from DGS or DPB at several stages to move forward. These reviews are important because they ensure projects align with the state's intent and produce safe buildings. Some agencies indicated these reviews can add time to project timelines, though. When we looked at available data for the different types of reviews, we found that DGS conducts many of its reviews within a few weeks, which aligns with its internal timeliness goals. Other types of reviews can add time to projects, but DGS and DPB don't currently track or have internal timeliness goals for them, so the extent to which they add time to projects is currently unknown. That's why we have some recommendations for DGS and DPB to develop timeliness goals for certain types of reviews that they don't have them for already. The last capital outlay finding that I want to share this morning is that adequate information is not readily available on agencies' capital outlay projects and buildings to help decision makers easily monitor project progress and make funding decisions. After reviewing the information that's currently available, it would be helpful for legislators, the governor, and their staff to have more information on capital projects and buildings. The biggest challenge to the way things are done now is that it's difficult to identify delayed capital projects, which makes it hard to intervene when projects are behind schedule or encountering challenges. According to some legislators, some information is not available that would be helpful when they're deciding which projects to authorize. We have some examples of project level and summary level information that would be beneficial to track and report at the bottom of slide 54. And we have some recommendations in the report for the General Assembly to consider directing DGS, DPB, and SHEV to work with agencies to add some information to budget requests, like the condition of buildings intended for renovation or replacement, and whether a project is part of an agency's capital plan. Also, having DGS, DPB, and SHEV annually compile some summary level information on things like average building condition and the status of open capital outlay projects. And finally, having six-pack to establish criteria for significantly delayed capital outlay projects, identifying and reviewing those projects annually, and requesting corrective action plans when needed. All these things would help the state have a better sense for how specific capital outlay projects are going and how agencies are handling capital more broadly. Mr. Chairman, I'll pause again.
Okay. Senator McDougall.
Mr. Chairman, I have a couple questions, and just, I'm not as experienced in this area as Senator McPike is, but some things I've picked up along the years and wonder how it impacts the system. One, I think in the state, we traditionally build for a 50-year usage as opposed to in the private sector, it's a 20-year usage. What impact does that have on the length of time it takes to complete a project?
Senator McDougall, that's a good question. And we did talk to DGS about that, and they confirmed that a number of the state's buildings, they are thinking about longer timelines because when things are built in the public sector, it needs to last. That can make a project take a little bit longer in some cases because you might be building things in a more complex way or with different materials, but it doesn't sound like it would explain projects that go past a decade.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator McDougall.
The other question I had was, I know as we were working through a number of projects, the pandemic, particularly that 2 years, created some substantial challenges. How many of these projects that went long included the years during that pandemic coverage?
Senator McDougall, a number of the projects that we feature in our figures did experience pandemic-related challenges. That is something we heard from agencies and higher ed institutions, that was a very difficult time for materials, contractor delays. So we certainly recognize that can increase timelines for these large projects.
Mr. Chairman,
I
think it would be helpful for me and maybe others if we had an idea of how many of the projects were during that pandemic timeframe that went long and how many of the projects went past 2 or so years, so we could get a sense of which of these included that time frame versus what were other challenges. But Mr. Chairman, I have one more.
Yes, sir.
Question. I know that some projects are larger and then have sub-projects. So in the analysis, were the larger, I'm going to use the term umbrella projects, Were those included in ones that were not finished within the 5 years, or?
Senator McDougall, those were included. We did try to work with DPB to see if there was a way to break out certain projects that maybe there's an expectation that they would take longer, those umbrella type projects. And the data just aren't categorized in a way where that was possible. But in working with DPB staff, perhaps manually they would be able to identify some of those. They did mention they are included in the data that we were given, but it's our understanding they would not be the bulk of projects, but they are included.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
The reason I ask those questions is I do think that some of the certification and making sure that some projects do have DPV supervision, particularly for agencies that are not as experienced in complex projects, those recommendations make sense. But I would be a little resonant for us to make substantial policy decisions if some of the timeframes that expanded the projects, or a significant number of them, were in the pandemic. I'd like to know some of those types of things as well before we would move in a direction. Some of them just sound like they're good sense regardless. Even if you're hitting it on time, you ought to, if it's a complex project, you ought to have somebody who is skilled and knowledgeable in administering it, because you're probably going to save money and it's going to be better regardless of the timeframes.
Senator McDougall, we should be able to look into that data a little bit and provide some more information on projects that would have been going on during the pandemic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Tata.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see one of your recommendations is to request corrective action plans. I was wondering, currently, with all the plans or the projects that are out there, are there incentives for getting the projects done on time, and are there penalties for projects that go way over? What's happening now?
Delegate Tate, I'm looking at my team to see if anyone remembers something that I don't, but I don't believe we heard of any sort of formalized incentives or penalties for projects that seem to take longer than was expected. I think right now there's a little bit of attention being paid to that with the data that's currently reported, but it's not collected and reported out in a way where it's very simple to figure out which projects have been going on for a long time. And so that's where we think a little bit more information would be helpful, but I'm not quite sure that there are formal incentives or penalties. We did hear from some of the central agency staff that, each project has very unique circumstances, so discussing each project would be helpful. But we thought, if Six-Pack were to play a little bit stronger of a role in identifying what would be a significantly delayed project, and then figuring out on a project-by-project basis if a corrective action plan would be helpful, that would be a good path forward.
Thank you. Okay. Senator McPike, the guy with experience in this and does this every day at his job.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure about all that, but appreciate it. One of the things that interests me is sort of the ranking or rating of project risk. Relating to Senator McDougall's question about impacts to schedule, when you assess projects, was there any discussion? I know there's sort of recommendations around dollars or thresholds. That's not always applicable in terms of the complexity of a project, but was there also a discussion of ranking of organizational maturity? In other words, is there leadership understanding the change of what is needed to actually construct and think through the thousands of questions needed to design and develop a new building in relation to those changes? So a lot of the delays are also caused by the planning phase. You have leadership changes, you have governance changes, you have a lot of other things that create risk and design changes. Was there any sort of discussion amongst those that you reached out to and talked to about just the organizational maturity and capacity to do a project outside of project management realm? But is their organization prepared to answer the questions about how they do business versus replicating what business they do today in its exact same form, which I think all of us here want to see them ask difficult questions about how they do business. So were some of those discussions had across stakeholders? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator McPike, absolutely. We did hear that different agencies have different capabilities, and sometimes small agencies that just don't do a lot of capital outlay projects. They don't have the expertise on staff to know the ins and outs of the state's process. Sometimes large agencies also struggle because maybe they're understaffed or have other challenges. But that is something that definitely came up. I think going forward, if the state were to establish some criteria for the types of capital outlay projects that perhaps need more assistance from DGS, or staff should go in for intensive training and have to complete that, that could be a criterion that was considered. We do know that right now it seems like that is something that can be done through the budget process with language put in for specific agencies.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator Pike.
Thank you. Just, I guess, one sort of follow-up, and maybe it's a follow-up with Six-Pack or other stakeholders, is just how to include, fundamentally, are we replicating in new design and architecture what we're physically doing today, the workflow and process, versus reimagining? And a lot of times I see organization structure struggle with literally replicating what they're doing today based on the building confines and architecture versus re-envisioning what they're doing and how they're doing it. And that's where the organizational maturity and the time it takes for them to rethink what they're doing can make a difference. So maybe it's a future question for Six-Pack or others in terms of how to integrate discussions around agency thoughtfulness about how this investment is going to last and adapt to the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Excel. Do you have any closing comments here? That's very interesting information.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one very short section left, and it's just 3 slides, so I'm going to click through it very quickly, and it's on capital project planning. Capital plans are important because they provide insight into agencies' capital needs. They help agencies identify the capital projects they need to do in the future, and they document when and how those projects will be addressed. According to experts, capital plans should exist either at the statewide or agency level. And practically speaking, we know capital plans can be resource intensive to develop because agencies' needs frequently change, but they are still important tools for identifying future capital needs. In Virginia, some agencies with large capital needs do not have formal capital plans. This isn't surprising because agencies aren't currently required to have them. In the absence of a requirement, some agencies lack a plan, including a few with significant capital needs. In other states, like Tennessee and Ohio, agencies are required to submit capital plans to inform their state's budget process. And this seems like something that would also be beneficial in Virginia. So we have a recommendation for the General Assembly to consider requiring state agencies with a large capital footprint or high maintenance needs to submit a 6-year capital improvement plan to Six-Pack every 2 years. Six-Pack could also request additional agencies that fall outside of these parameters to submit plans as needed. And Mr. Chairman, that is all I have for you this morning.
Would these plans include the major rehab that you talked about earlier?
The maintenance reserve projects, yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
That's right.
Well, I know in Fairfax County they have a CIP they approve every year. It's an annual thing. They go through it. It's kind of surprising the state doesn't have that. Okay. I don't see anybody's oh, I do. Senator McPike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was a misapplied button from earlier, so thank you for the staff for the great work.
What does Alexandria's capital improvement plan look like? Is it up to date? Okay, good. Good. I knew it would be. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Director.
Mr. Chairman, that concludes our staff presentations. I think you'll probably be relieved to know. So the next meeting is Monday, November the 10th. We'll be presenting the findings from our review of correctional education. The topic selection subcommittee will meet shortly. I want to know for members of the subcommittee that you should have lunches here that are available to you before we start that meeting. That's all we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your close attention to this matter. It's very interesting what we learned today, and let's make sure we make some improvements as we go forward. Thank you all for attending today. We are adjourned. Yes, sir.